Hey everyone. So the whole presentation that I'm giving is available on GitHub, so if you want to follow live or download it. So we'll cover why you would want to compile from source, what are some limitations about compiling, some common held beliefs that are slightly incorrect, how to do it, and then some live examples, and then Q&A if anybody has any questions. So why should anybody compile source code? If you just want to learn, play, if you want to make modifications to some product that's open source to do something else, if you want to improve and contribute, fix bugs, or add features. And a lot of people want to verify what they're running. And I'm going to focus on this for a few slides because there are some misconceptions about what you get by compiling source yourself. So first of all, just because something's open source doesn't mean that it's necessarily that it's more secure. So there's a famous recent bug called the Heartbleed bug, which was actually in the open source code for more than 2 years. This is used by large institutions. It affected more than 15% of secure websites. The second limitation is that it's often very difficult to verify anything you download, even the source itself. So for example, even if you're using SSL, HTTPS connections, if an attacker, such as a criminal or the NSA, or am I repeating myself? If they have the private key of the server, they can do a man-in-the-middle attack if they have the necessary route to your client. There are other attacks. You can manipulate the certificate authority, and the attacker can get the certificate authority to create a new certificate that the attacker has the key for. There are some ways to get around this, but the key, the takeaway here is that I don't want anybody to think that just because they're compiling from source, they're safe from all attackers. Oh, and just one minor point there. Some people think, well, I'll just get everything through Tor or through Tails. And how do you know that what you're running, Tor, Tails, or any other product, how do you know that what you downloaded and installed was not corrupted? So it's unfortunately very difficult to verify. You need some sort of third party or other verification. This is a famous quote from Ken Thompson. He's a legend in computer science. He worked at Bell Labs. He was one of the co-creators of Unix. He's currently working at Google on the Go language. He's created UTF-8. And I'll just read this really quick. You can't trust code that you did not totally create yourself. Just a little background, this came from a presentation that he gave on the limitations of source code, and he actually demonstrated that you can create a compiler that creates a compiler that will have a vulnerability that you will not be able to see that's there, even though you have the source code. The compiler itself is actually doing something that you can't possibly know unless you decompiled the compiler. But anyway, what he says basically is that any low-level loader, such as an assembler or a loader or microcode, can have certain malware. And the last line, he says, a well-installed microcode bug will be almost impossible to detect. So this is not to dissuade anybody from compiling code, just to make you aware of the limitations and just know that this is possible. So to compile, I recommend compiling in Linux. In general, there's going to be more support for it. There's going to be more questions answered on the internet. And so your problems are less likely. But certainly you can compile on Mac and Windows, whatever you like. If you would like to compile on Linux and you're running on Mac or Windows, I recommend using either VirtualBox or Windows Virtual PC or QEMU. So there are many flavors of Linux, and the instructions will vary depending on which flavor you're using. So I personally prefer Fedora, so some of these instructions will not work on Ubuntu or other flavors. These are the 3 packages that I'm going to talk about. Bitcoin Core is created by the Bitcoin Foundation, and it has the Bitcoin server that does all the, gets the blockchain. And then there's also a GUI client on top of that. Then BitcoinArmory is a desktop Bitcoin wallet, and Bitcoin-Wallet is an Android Bitcoin wallet. Just a little background, I'm not a huge Bitcoin expert, but there are plenty here that can answer any questions. So the steps to compile, basically, the first step is review the license. Some licenses are restrictive in what you can do. Unless you're just a pirate and you just want to do whatever, go for it. Step 2 is to download the sources. And usually the sources come with instructions of how to actually compile. And then compile and install. So step 1, license. Usually the license will be in a file in the root directory or on the website. And it's usually in a text file, or it's on a website that hosts the code. If there's no license, which is unfortunately common, you have to look at, for example, if it's on GitHub, then the default license is actually very impermissive. So this is an unfortunate state of the industry right now. A couple licenses you're likely to see, MIT and BSD are very permissive. You usually just have to attribute that if you distribute that code, where it came from. GPL, the idea there is that if you make modifications, you're supposed to share them back to the community where you got the code from. AGPL is very similar. It's after GPL. The idea is that, so with GPL, if you just download GPL source code and you just play with it locally, then as long as you don't distribute it, you don't have to make your modifications available for others. AGPL is specifically designed to deal with that so that even if you don't distribute your new code, if let's say it's on serving a website, you still need to share your modifications. So the whole idea here is to encourage people that are taking GPL source and putting it on a website and serving the product through the website to still share their modifications. Apache is very similar to MIT and BSD. It grants some patent rights. This is mostly concerned for companies, but it just explicitly grants them. Public domain, there's some questions about exactly what it means, but it's very permissive. And then there's others, of course. So to download sources, they're either zip files or tarballs. And for example, on GitHub, you can clone code, or they're simply on websites. So BitcoinArmory has instructions on their website. And usually the zip file will have instructions in the root folder in the notes file or README file. So to actually compile source, you're taking essentially human readable text and you want to compile a binary. And these are common programs that do the compilation. So for Android, you'll use the Google SDK. For iOS, you'll use Objective-C and Xcode. For Windows, you'll usually use Visual Studio. For Linux, there's various flavors, GTK, Qt, and Python. And then there's others, Maven and Swing and SWT. And then once you have an actual binary, then you just install it. Like, everybody's pretty familiar with that. So I know I ran through that pretty quick, but I will go into more detail. So for this demo, I recommend everybody just use a virtual machine. So I mentioned earlier that if you're on Windows or Mac, you can run Linux through a virtual machine. Even if you're on Linux, you can run another Linux in a virtual machine. I am using VirtualBox here just because it's pretty much supported on every platform, so just so that everybody can use it. I prefer Fedora, and I won't go through all this, but these are instructions on how to create and launch a virtual machine. So now I'm going to show some commands and code for the various steps that I covered. And I can go through any of these in the live demo, and I'll explain some of these commands. So various flavors of Linux have different ways of downloading dependencies. So source code often has dependencies of, they're not going to rebuild everything, so they're going to depend on other libraries. So for example, if you want to do encryption, you'll use OpenSSL. So there are various ways to get these dependencies. Fedora uses yum, And so these instructions show how to install the dependencies required for these Bitcoin projects. And basically, you're just specifying a list of packages to install. Pretty simple. Now, this is the most complicated of our examples, but it's also required for all the others. So I'll take some time to go through this. This is how to compile the main Bitcoin D and Bitcoin QT source code from the Bitcoin Foundation. So I'll go through these lines. I guess I should be pointing. The first one is, the first kind of half of this is to get prerequisites and dependencies. So the Bitcoin source has certain dependencies that aren't easily installed, and you have to just get them manually. So the first command is going to just download Berkeley database that's used by the wallet. And common things that you'll see when compiling C code is you do configure, make, and make install. So configure checks your system, make sure you have every compiler and everything else. So you'll give it various options. In this case, I won't explain all the options, but if anybody has any questions, then once you've configured it, you do make. Make does the actual compiling for C programs. And then make install actually puts those binaries somewhere where, in this case, Bitcoin can use them. So in this next one, the fifth one down, we go and get SSL on Fedora. The default SSL doesn't have some of the elliptic curve technology, so you have to download SSL and compile it into Bitcoin. So that's the next four. Again, we're doing configure, it's called config, then make and make install. These are all within the instructions files of each package. So you don't have to figure all this out on your own. And then finally down here, we're actually getting the Bitcoin Core code. Git clone will essentially download the latest source of the Bitcoin packages. And then again, we're doing configure basically with autogen. And there's various options here I can explain. But again, it's the same pattern of configure, make, and make install. And then finally, I have an example here of a Bitcoin configuration file. To run the Bitcoin server, you need a basic configuration file. And then you just run Bitcoin QT. So I'll show you a live version of this. So here I have Linux within Linux. And I'm going to... So this is the listing of the files that were gathered through the clone operation right here. And I've already done the compile. The compile will take about anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes when you include all the downloading of the dependencies and compiling dependencies. That's for this project. This project is huge. So the next one, BitcoinArmory, takes 5 minutes at max. So it depends. It's proportional to how much code there is. Once it's built, when we did make install, it actually puts the Bitcoin binaries in a global directory. So I can just type Bitcoin QT. And now this is loading the Bitcoin Core GUI client that was compiled in this machine. And what's great is you can obviously look at the source, you can verify it to some extent, and you can make changes. So that's what normally people do this for. I think it's going to start downloading the blockchain, so I'm just going to close it for now because.
How long does it take to get the blockchain?
I think it's currently 20 gigabytes or so. So, however fast your internet connection is.
I didn't know it grows that quickly.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, you probably know more about this, but I think it's growing linearly right now. I'm not sure. So, and we can come back to these if anybody has questions, but I'll cover all the examples first. So the next example, much easier. This is BitcoinArmory. This is a desktop wallet. It actually requires the Bitcoin D service that we just previously compiled, or if you've installed it another way. So this shows you how simple it can be. In this case, we're just cloning the BitcoinArmory source, change the directory into that folder, make, we'll do the compile, and then we run it through Python. And again, I'll show you what that looks like. And in fact, I think this will, if Bitcoin D is not running, it will launch it automatically. Oops. So, I mean, it's what you would expect. It's the program that we wanted to compile. And now one thing I wanted to show is one of the major reasons why people get the source code is to actually change it, to compile it, to modify it the way they like it, change colors, change function. So what I recommend, learning a whole code base takes a long time, obviously depending on how large it is. So what I recommend is reverse engineering it. And there's various ways to do that, but the easiest way is to hone in on the part that you want to change by looking for it in the GUI, for example. So for example, in this case, let's say I want to change the title of the program when it's running. So what I'll do is I know what that title is as it stands, so I can just recursively search through all the code and find all instances of that. Now at that point you have to understand, in this case, Python, how to code Python, or C or Java or whatever it is. So that's obviously a whole another discussion. But once you find it, you just change the code, recompile, and then rerun. It's pretty fun, I think, the first time when you make a change that is important to you and you see it actually live. And then the last example is Bitcoin Wallet. This is an Android wallet, and again, pretty simple instructions. We go and get the source, and actually, sorry, the first step is we need to install the SDK. So the Android SDK, we'll get it from Google, and then there's an install script that downloads the various versions of the SDK. Once we have the Android SDK, then we clone the Bitcoin wallet source code. And again, well, we'll do change directory. Now we have to patch something. This is again where you need to read the instructions. It's not obvious that you would need to do this, but you'd have to patch one of the files and then compile using Maven in this case. Each compiler depends on the type of source code. And then it builds the actual APK files that you can just put right on your phone. Now, they won't be signed, they won't be official, and you have to enable development mode on your phone. And this is the last slide. So when you're building, often it's just whack-a-mole with errors. So usually you will be missing some dependency. It'll say error looking for dependency X, and so you go and install dependency X. There's no magic to it. It's kind of brute force sometimes. You'll often see this when you're running configure with C. With things like Python and Java, it's usually much easier. Things are just they're much simpler than C code. After you make a change, you just do a build again. And this is really true. A lot of times you'll see a lot of output. I can show you an example of a compilation. Actually, I'll do that. You'll see a lot of output. So I'm going to recompile, let's say, Bitcoin. So usually there's a command to clean your existing compilation. In this case, we do make clean. And now, if I was going through the instructions, here's where I have all the dependencies, I have the code, now I'm going to build it. When I type make, it's going to be a lot of output. And usually, if there's a problem, it will bail out and fail and tell you there's an error. In this case, it's actually not too much output, maybe because I had already done it. That's it. It's a lot of playing around. If you have any questions, you can send me an email. And if you want to make a donation for this talk, feel free. So thank you. Any questions?
Can you explain why you didn't patch?
So actually, it's linked here. And the reason is that, and the link actually goes to the README file. So this is an example of how you really do need to read the instructions before compiling. In this case, it says that if you're using a particular version of the Maven compiler, which we are in this case, then you just simply need to update this version. So my guess is that this developer is just on an older version and for whatever reason hasn't upgraded. So he's telling people on newer versions this is what you need to do. All right. Thanks very much.
The presentation. Thanks a whole bunch. Thanks everybody for coming. So at this point, you guys are welcome to Mix and Mingle, network, and more importantly, also trade Bitcoin. So the big question is, how many people here are looking to buy or are looking to sell Bitcoin? Cool. Got one person. Anyone here looking to two people? There are two people looking to sell Bitcoin. And anybody here looking to buy Bitcoin? We got one. Well, you've seen the hands go up, so compare it with the appropriate people. And if you are just in general looking, who here feels like they're fairly knowledgeable about Bitcoin and willing to share their knowledge with other people in the room? So anyone who's looking to learn about Bitcoin, you know the hands that are up. Feel free to mix and mingle with those people. If anyone's also looking for a bite to eat, we'll be here for maybe about 30 to 45 minutes. We're welcome to head over to the taco shop, and they take Bitcoin over there. So just around the corner over at City Tacos. Cool. All right. And also, I am, by the way, CEO of Airbit. So this is our office space over here. We've got an office that you guys have walked through. This is a co-working space called Union Co-work. We're really happy to be here because they take Bitcoin as well. And we are a business directory as well as a wallet. If anybody would like to actually hang out for a little bit during the end of this meeting and actually walk through our wallet and give us a little bit of feedback, do kind of a little bit of a test trial with our wallet and just kind of walk through the UI, come see me. We'd be happy to give like maybe 5 millibit for about 15 minutes of your time just to walk through and give us some feedback. Cool. All right. Thanks a lot. Just come grab me if you're interested in doing that. Cool. Thanks a lot. Thanks, guys.